students, welcome to this video of Political Science 231 Comparative Politics, Lecture 6 on non-democratic regimes. Today we're going to focus on monarchical, theocratic, and military regimes. This audio and PowerPoint will be broken into several pieces to make it easier for you to access. If you remember from last time, we did a little talking about the types of non-democratic regimes that exist in the world. There are monarchies, single-party regimes, military regimes, oligarchies, theocracies, and personalistic types of regimes. Today, we'll focus on 3 of those. The monarchy that we'll focus on today is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as you can see from the map, is on the Arabian Peninsula. It was brought together as a state by King Abdulaziz in 1932. It was called Saudi after the founder of the dynasty, who was known as Al-Saud. The state formation had begun several hundred years earlier, though, in the 1700s. The country has been ruled since 1932, since the formation of the modern state, by Abdulaziz and his sons. Now, what is the Saudi monarchical regime like? In Saudi Arabia, there's a bit of overlap with religious rule, but this is not a theocratic regime. What it is instead is an alliance between the Al-Sauds and the Wahhabi religious establishment. These clerics of this, what we would see as traditionalist type of school of Islam, give legitimacy to the Al-Sauds. So the Al-Sauds get to rule, and the Wahhabis get to control religious life and policy in areas that are of interest to them. Interestingly, Saudi Arabia's constitution is the document, the Quran itself. Now, how do we see the religious influence in this monarchy? We see it in many organizations. One is, that strikes us as Westerners, is the influence of the Saudi religious police. There's a group called the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, and they can go around and enforce the Wahhabi vision of morality. Women being covered, women not driving, women not out traveling without a male chaperone, and those kinds of things. Part of the Wahhabi control and the Sauds' control is the suppression of Shia Muslims, who are not Sunni Muslims like much of the other Saudi population in the East. So everyone goes along with Sunni practices as enforced by the Wahhabis. Now, where did these Wahhabis come from? Well, as with the formation of the state, Wahhabism itself comes out of the 1700s too. What does it mean? What is a Wahhabi? Well, it's not a term that the Wahhabis would use themselves. To them, they would see themselves as muwahidun, that is, people who follow the Tawheed, which is a rigorous monotheism. Nothing else can be God. You can't worship at shrines, you can't set up some kind of spiritual relationship with God, anything like that. Any idolatry is wiped out. So that's really what the Wahhabis focus on. They want to return to a pure Islam such as existed during the Prophet's time, and they limit the sources of inspiration for religion to the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. Now, Saudi Arabia is in a unique position because of its unique position in the Muslim world. Saudi Arabia, as the home of both Mecca and Medina, the 2 holiest places in Islam, is a focal point for the Muslim world. It is also one of the richest Muslim states because of all of its oil wealth. Saudi Arabia also, and particularly within the last decade or so, has projected itself as a guardian of Sunni Muslims in the world, and has tried to promote a rigorous Sunni orthodoxy, even in other Muslim countries. Now, what does a monarchy look like if you actually get down to the nuts and bolts? This picture is the new King Salman, who's taken over, and it is, in Saudi Arabia, it is ruled by the Al Saud family, the monarch and the family elders. Now, the king is both the head of the state and the government, but there is no sense or notion that he's a divinely put in place. The king is not all-powerful. He has to consult, particularly with these other powerful members of the royal family. Abdulaziz, the founder of the regime, had many wives and others, and many, many children, and so there's not just one branch of the family that's powerful. There's many. The ministries and governors are all appointed by the king too, and that's where you'd find princes in these and many other roles. There's a wider consultation mechanism that is a shura, or consultation council, and this could include about 120 prominent Saudi citizens, and they do have a right to have a say, but they don't have a right to have the final say in how decisions are made. Interestingly, because of the Saudis' wealth, they're also well-educated people. They're rising into the bureaucracy, and more you see a rise of technocrats, that is, people who are technically competent, trained, skilled individuals. And that education and knowledge is a source of power too. The judiciary in Saudi Arabia is based on Islamic law. They follow a particular school of jurisprudence known as Hanbali. There is a legislature, as I said, called the Council of Ministers, but it just passes laws. And it's really about the assent of the king. This is not a deliberative or democratic body. Now, Saudi Arabia has been changing a great deal in recent years. We might think of it as unchanging, where women can't drive, and the country lives back in the 700s, but that's not the case. The Arab Spring led Saudis themselves to press for change, and so the government, in order to foreclose any revolutionary change, started to distribute more benefits and make some changes. One change in the last few years is that women will be able to vote and stand for municipal elections in 2015. Women also engage in repeated protests against the ban on female driving. You can see the picture there. That's a woman who's gone out to drive against the rules in order to show that she can, and to highlight. Sometimes women will film themselves doing this and then post it in order to pressure the government to change. Just one other thing from this slide. The government has founded also a university that lives kind of outside some of the harsher strictures of Saudi Arabia. So this university, called KAUST, or the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, is a mixed-sex university. There's no religious police there. Women aren't required to be veiled in classes. And so it's an attempt by the last King, Abdullah, to create something more progressive for Saudis. At the same time, as some of these trends are pushing for change, Saudi Arabia also has been putting in place some pretty draconian laws to keep the people under control. Controls on the press and the internet have been tightened since the Arab Spring of 2011. And many other things. Now, according to our book, the way we analyze a non-democratic regime is we look at these 4 criteria in each. So the size of the electorate. Who is it that chooses the leader, in this case a monarch? So in Saudi Arabia, that would be the king and other influential family members. About 2007, the Saudis created something called the Allegiance Council that will decide on the succession. Now, how do you get into this electorate? Well, you have to be born into the top levels of the royal family, and that explains our characterization of this regime as monarchy. How do you get selected leader? To this point, all the leaders have been direct descendants of Abdulaziz, but the direct descendants of Abdulaziz are aged now. Perhaps Salman, the current king, will be the last one of those. What are the rules governing the use of power in this system? Generally, consultation and consensus is slow-moving, deliberative kind of a system, rather than one that makes rapid changes. We can take a look at both the Polity 4 scores and the Freedom House scores to understand the level of democracy or freedom in Saudi Arabia. So we'll just talk about Freedom House first. Freedom House ranks Saudi Arabia as a 7 on political rights and a 7 on civil liberties. That is a scale that goes from 1 to 7, 1 being the most democratic and 7 being the least democratic. So Saudi Arabia ranks very low on political rights and very low on civil liberties. This shows you the polity scores. Polity has a different numbering system. It goes from a 10, sort of a full democracy up here, to a -10, which would be the most authoritarian system down here. You can see, ranging across the years, Saudi Arabia has remained at a -10, or the most anti-democratic score you could achieve. This is the conclusion of the first part of this lecture on monarchical theocratic regimes. We will begin another lecture on theocratic regimes